6 months after accidentally starting the most unlikely cultural revolution in galactic history, Marcus Chen stood in the newly constructed Hall of Aesthetic Contemplation and watched an 8-foot-tall crystalline being attempt to paint a flower. The result looked more like a geometric interpretation of the explosion, but Lord Kethmore was trying, and that was what mattered. Perhaps, Marcus suggested gently, try thinking less about what the flower does and more about how it makes you feel. Lord Kethmore's crown pulsed in patterns that Marcus now recognized as confusion mixed with determination. But flowers exist to facilitate plant reproduction through attractive displays for pollinators. How can we ignore their function? You don't ignore it, Marcus said, moving to stand beside the easel. You see beyond it. Yes, the flower exists to attract pollinators, but it does so by being beautiful. The function and the beauty aren't separate things. They're the same thing. This was the challenge Marcus faced every day now. The Zephyrians had embraced the concept of beauty with the same intellectual rigor they applied to everything else. They studied it, analyzed it, and tried to reverse engineer it like any other technology. But beauty wasn't a technology. It was an experience, a feeling, a way of seeing the world. Queen Veltar entered the hall with her usual fluid grace, but Marcus could immediately tell something was different. She moved with new confidence, and her crown pulsed with patterns he'd never seen before. Most striking of all, she wore what could only be described as jewelry. Delicate silver chains that connected her natural crystal formations and caught the light in mesmerizing ways. Your Majesty, Marcus said, bowing slightly. Even after 6 months, he hadn't gotten used to the casual way she expected him to treat her. You're wearing something new. Queen Veltar's 4 arms moved in a gesture Marcus had learned meant pleased satisfaction. We have been experimenting with personal aesthetic enhancement. Do you find it effective? Marcus studied the intricate metalwork that somehow complemented, rather than competed with her natural crystalline crown. The chains followed the lines of her anatomy in ways that emphasized her alien grace without trying to make her look human. It's stunning, Marcus said honestly. You're not copying human beauty standards, you're creating your own. The Queen's expression brightened in a way that still amazed Marcus. 6 months ago, she had been a terrifying alien monarch. Now she was becoming something unprecedented. A being who had learned to see herself as beautiful and was teaching others to do the same. We have news, Queen Veltar said, settling into her preferred thinking position. The Council of Noble Houses has voted. They wish to implement the beauty protocols across all 17 systems. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. The beauty protocols were the cultural reform program they'd developed over the past few months, a systematic way of teaching Zephyrian society to recognize and appreciate aesthetic experiences. They'd tested it on a small group of court volunteers, but implementing it across 17 star systems would affect trillions of beings. That's ambitious, Marcus said carefully. Are you sure they're ready for that kind of change? Queen Veltar gestured toward the various nobles scattered throughout the hall, all engaged in different artistic pursuits. Lord Kethmore had abandoned his flower painting and was now experimenting with arranging colored crystals in pleasing patterns. Lady Morthane was attempting to compose music using the natural resonance frequencies of her crown formations. Count Velcaris had somehow talked 3 other nobles into helping him choreograph what he called movement art. Look around you, Marcus Chen, the Queen said. 3 months ago, these beings spent their time calculating military strategies and analyzing economic projections. Now they create things that serve no purpose beyond bringing joy. Tell us this change is not beautiful in itself. Marcus had to admit she had a point. The transformation he'd witnessed was remarkable. The Zephyrian nobles hadn't just learned to appreciate beauty, they'd become more curious, more empathetic, more interested in experiences beyond their immediate survival needs. It was as if learning to see beauty had awakened parts of their minds they'd never known existed. "But 17 star systems," Marcus said. "That's a massive undertaking. How do you even begin to teach aesthetic philosophy to entire planets?" Queen Veltar's crown pulsed in what Marcus now recognized as her "I have been planning something elaborate" pattern. "We have developed a proposal. Would you like to hear it?" Marcus nodded, though he was beginning to suspect he wasn't going to like whatever she'd been plotting. "We will establish beauty centers on every major world," the Queen announced. "Institutions dedicated to teaching aesthetic appreciation and artistic creation. Each center will be staffed by graduates from our program here, spreading the knowledge outward like ripples in a pond." That actually sounded reasonable, which made Marcus immediately suspicious. Queen Veltar had learned to think big during their time together. "And?" Marcus prompted. "And," the Queen continued with the tone of someone delivering good news, "we would like you to oversee the entire program. You would become the Empire's first Minister of Aesthetic Philosophy." Marcus stared at her. "Minister?" "The position comes with a fleet of ships, a staff of several thousand, and authority to establish cultural policy across all 17 systems," Queen Veltar added helpfully. "We have also arranged for Earth to receive significant technological advancement in exchange for your continued services." Marcus sat down heavily on the nearest crystal formation. 6 months ago, he'd been a junior linguist with a studio apartment and a collection of houseplants. Now he was being offered authority over cultural policy for a star empire. "Your Majesty," he said slowly, "I'm not qualified to remake the culture of 17 star systems." Queen Veltar moved to sit across from him, her alien features arranged in an expression of gentle amusement. "Marcus Chen, 6 months ago you accidentally taught us that we could be beautiful. Since then, you have transformed our court, changed how we see ourselves, and given us a new way of understanding our place in the universe. If that does not qualify you to spread beauty across the stars, what would?" Marcus looked around the hall again, taking in the sight of alien nobles creating art for the simple joy of creation. He thought about Lord Kethmore's terrible flower painting, which had somehow captured something essential about the experience of seeing beauty, even if it didn't technically resemble a flower. He thought about Lady Morthane's crystalline music, which sounded like nothing human ears had ever heard but was undeniably moving. He thought about Queen Veltar herself, who had gone from terrifying alien monarch to someone who wore jewelry for the simple pleasure of catching light. "Okay," Marcus said, "but I have conditions." Queen Veltar leaned forward, all 4 arms positioned in attentive listening mode. "Name them." "First, we don't force this on anyone. Beauty can't be mandated. It has to be discovered." "Agreed." "Second, we respect existing cultures. We're not trying to make everyone Zephyrian or human. We're trying to help them find beauty in what they already are." "Wise." "Agreed." "Third," Marcus said, "I want to establish an exchange program with Earth. If we're going to spread human concepts of beauty across the galaxy, we should also bring Zephyrian perspectives back to humanity. This has to be a two-way cultural exchange." Queen Veltar's crown pulsed so brightly that several nearby nobles looked up from their art projects. "Marcus Chen," she said, "you continue to exceed our expectations. Yes, absolutely yes. Let us show humanity that beauty is not a uniquely human trait, but a universal possibility." Marcus felt a strange mixture of excitement and terror as the implications of what they were planning hit him. They weren't just changing one alien species, they were potentially changing how all species in the galaxy saw themselves and each other. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, "I think we're about to start something much bigger than either of us can imagine." Queen Veltar stood up with her characteristic grace. But now Marcus could see new dimensions in her movement, intentional beauty layered over natural function. She had become art in motion without ceasing to be herself. "Human Marcus Chen," she said, extending one of her 4 hands toward him. "We believe that is exactly the point." As Marcus shook her offered hand, a gesture they'd invented together, combining human custom with Zephyrian courtesy, he realized that his accidental compliment had become something neither species could have achieved alone. It had become the first step toward a galaxy where beauty wasn't just something humans appreciated, but something all beings could discover, create, and share. Looking around the hall of aesthetic contemplation, watching alien beings create art for the pure joy of creation, Marcus couldn't help but smile. He'd started with one careless compliment about a queen being beautiful. Now they were going to make the entire galaxy beautiful together. And somehow, that felt like the most human thing he'd ever done. 3 weeks into his new role as the Zephyrian Empire's first advisor on aesthetic philosophy, Marcus Chen had learned several important things. First, explaining human concepts of beauty to a species that had never experienced aesthetic appreciation was like trying to describe color to someone who had been blind since birth. Second, Zephyrian food tasted like someone had decided to make soup out of batteries and regret. Third, Queen Veltar was possibly the most intellectually curious being he had ever encountered, which made her both fascinating and terrifying. His quarters in the Crystal Palace were larger than his entire apartment back on Earth. The walls could change color and opacity at will, and the furniture seemed to grow from the floor when he needed it. It should have been paradise. But Marcus was discovering that being a cultural revolutionary was exhausting work. "Again," Queen Veltar said, settling her tall frame into what Marcus had learned was her thinking posture. She sat cross-legged on the crystalline floor of her private study, all 4 arms arranged in different positions that somehow conveyed attention and contemplation. "Explain to us why humans find sunsets beautiful." Marcus rubbed his temples, trying to find a new way to approach the concept. They'd been working on this particular lesson for 3 days, and he was running out of metaphors. "It's not just what we see," Marcus said, pacing in front of the massive window that looked out over the Zephyrian capital city. "It's what it makes us feel. A sunset represents the end of day, the promise of rest, the cycle of time passing. The colors are warm and soft, which humans associate with comfort and safety." Queen Veltar's crown pulsed in the pattern Marcus had learned, meant deep concentration. "But the colors serve no functional purpose. The temperature change is minimal. Why would evolution program you to find meaning in something so inefficient?" "Maybe that's exactly why it's beautiful," Marcus said, struck by sudden inspiration. "Beauty isn't efficient. It's not practical. It's the part of us that goes beyond survival, beyond necessity. It's what makes us more than just biological machines." For the first time since the lesson began, the Queen's posture shifted. She uncrossed her legs and leaned forward, her black eyes fixed on Marcus with laser intensity. "More than biological machines," she repeated slowly. "You believe beauty elevates your species above pure function?" "I think it elevates all of us," Marcus said. "When you appreciate beauty, you're acknowledging that existence can be more than just survival and reproduction. You're saying that joy, wonder, and aesthetic pleasure have value in themselves." Queen Veltar was quiet for so long that Marcus wondered if he'd somehow offended her. Then she stood up with fluid grace and moved to the window, gazing out at her city with those depthless eyes. "Show us," she said suddenly. "Show you what, Your Majesty?" "Show us something beautiful in our world, not through human eyes, but through ours. Help us see what you see." Marcus joined her at the window, looking out over the Zephyrian capital. The city was a marvel of crystal architecture that defied several laws of physics. spires twisted into impossible spirals, connected by bridges that seemed to be made of solid light. The whole thing pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that served as both communication and transportation systems. "Look at those towers," Marcus said, pointing to a cluster of buildings that rose like frozen waterfalls. "See how they're not perfectly symmetrical? Each one is slightly different, like they grew naturally instead of being built. And the way the light moves through them, it's like watching thoughts become visible." Queen Veltar followed his gaze, her crown pulsing brighter. "The asymmetry is a design flaw. Our architects have never been able to achieve perfect mathematical precision in vertical construction." "But that's what makes it beautiful," Marcus insisted. "Perfect symmetry is cold, sterile. Those tiny imperfections make each building unique. They give the city character, personality. It's not just functional, it's alive." The Queen's head turned toward him, and Marcus caught that strange expression he'd been seeing more often lately. If he didn't know better, he'd call it wonder. "You see life where we see inefficiency," she said. "You see character where we see error." "I see beauty where you see problems," Marcus agreed. "That's the difference." Queen Veltar walked back to the center of the room, but instead of sitting in her usual position, she stood facing a wall-mounted mirror made of polished crystal. Marcus had never seen her look at her own reflection before. "Tell us," she said quietly, "what you see when you look at us." Marcus felt like they'd reached some kind of crucial moment, though he wasn't sure why. The Queen stood perfectly still, watching her reflection, waiting for his answer. "I see someone who's spent her entire life being told she's powerful, wise, and dangerous," Marcus said carefully. "But I also see someone who's curious about things that serve no practical purpose, someone who spends hours trying to understand a concept that has no military or political value just because it might make existence richer." The Queen's four arms moved in small, nervous gestures. "What else?" Marcus stepped closer, studying her reflection in the crystal mirror. "I see someone who's beautiful not because of how she looks, but because of how she thinks. Your mind is like a vast library that suddenly discovered there were entire sections it had never explored. You're not just learning about beauty, you're becoming it." Queen Veltar's crown pulsed in rapid, complex patterns that Marcus had never seen before. When she turned away from the mirror, her expression was unlike anything he'd witnessed in 3 weeks of close observation. "We have never thought of ourselves as anything other than functional," she said. "Our crystalline formations aid in neural processing. Our height provides advantage in threat assessment. Our additional limbs offer superior manipulation of tools and environment." She paused, touching one hand to her crown. "But when you speak of us, you make these things sound like poetry." "Because they are," Marcus said. "Evolution isn't just about function, it's also about elegance, about solving problems in ways that are not just effective, but graceful. You're not just built for survival, you're built like living art." The Queen walked to a small alcove where she kept her personal belongings. Marcus had noticed the collection before, but never paid much attention. Now he watched as she picked up various objects: a crystal formation that served no obvious purpose, a piece of metalwork with intricate but non-functional decorations, a small plant with silver leaves that caught light in interesting ways. "We have been collecting these," she said, arranging them carefully on a table. "Items that serve no purpose beyond appealing to the eye. We told ourselves it was part of our cultural research, but—" She trailed off, touching the silver plant gently. "But you liked them," Marcus finished. "You found them beautiful, even before you had a word for it." Queen Veltar nodded slowly. "We have discovered that we have been unconsciously seeking beauty our entire lives without understanding what we were doing. These objects, certain arrangements of architecture, specific patterns of light and sound, they have always drawn our attention in ways we could not explain. Marcus felt a surge of excitement. This was the breakthrough they'd been working toward. Your Majesty, I think you've always had an aesthetic sense. You just didn't have the cultural framework to recognize it. Which means, the Queen said, her voice taking on a tone of growing realization, that our entire species may have this capacity. We may all be capable of experiencing beauty, but we have simply never been taught to recognize it. The implications hit Marcus like a revelation. An entire civilization of beings who had been unconsciously drawn to beauty their whole lives, but had never understood what they were feeling. It was like discovering that everyone had been colorblind, but didn't know colors existed. Your Majesty, Marcus said slowly, what if we taught others? What if we could help your entire species discover this part of themselves? Queen Veltar's crown pulsed so brightly that Marcus had to shield his eyes. When the light dimmed, she was smiling in a way he had never seen before. Human Marcus Chen, she said, we believe you have just proposed the most ambitious cultural revolution in galactic history. Marcus grinned back at her. Just promise me we'll start small. Maybe with the court nobles before we try to reform an entire star empire. The Queen's crystalline laughter filled the room. We promise to begin with small steps, she said, but we make no promises about where those steps might lead us. As Marcus watched Queen Veltar carefully arrange her collection of beautiful objects, he realized that he wasn't just teaching her about human aesthetics. He was helping her discover a part of herself that had always existed but had never been allowed to flourish. And if they could do that for an entire species, well, the galaxy was about to become a much more interesting place. Marcus Chen had always been terrible at first impressions. Back on Earth, he'd once told his boss's wife that her haircut made her look adventurous, when he meant to say lovely. That had cost him a promotion. Now, standing in the crystalline throne room of the Zephyrian Empire, he was about to make a mistake that would change the course of galactic history. The human diplomatic mission to the Zephyrian homeworld had been planned for months. Earth's first contact protocols were strict, detailed, and absolutely clear about one thing. Do not offend the alien royalty. The Zephyrians controlled 17 star systems and had technology that could either elevate humanity to a spacefaring civilization or reduce Earth to cosmic dust. Marcus wasn't supposed to be here. He was a junior linguist, barely qualified to polish the boots of the real diplomats. But when Ambassador Harrison caught the Rigelian flu 3 hours before the ceremony, someone had to fill in. That someone, unfortunately, was Marcus. The Zephyrian queen sat on a throne that seemed to be carved from a single massive diamond. She was tall, nearly 8 feet, with skin that shimmered between silver and blue depending on the light. Her eyes were large and completely black, like looking into the depths of space itself. 4 arms moved with fluid grace, each ending in delicate hands with too many fingers. Most striking of all were the crystalline formations growing from her shoulders and head, creating what looked like a crown made of living gems. The formal introduction began with the usual diplomatic pleasantries. Marcus read from his prepared speech, carefully pronouncing each Zephyrian phrase he'd practiced for weeks. Everything was going smoothly until Queen Veltar asked him a direct question. Human Marcus Chen. Her voice resonated like singing crystal. What do you think of our court? This wasn't in the script. Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead as dozens of alien nobles turned their black eyes toward him. The court was magnificent, he had to admit. Walls of pure crystal caught and reflected light in impossible ways, creating dancing patterns that hurt to look at directly. But he was supposed to give a diplomatic answer about cultural exchange and mutual respect. Instead, his nervous mind betrayed him completely. Your Majesty, he said, his voice cracking slightly, you're beautiful. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Every sound in the throne room ceased. Even the subtle humming of the crystal walls went silent. Marcus felt his soul leave his body as he realized what he'd just done. He hadn't complimented the court. He'd directly called the alien queen beautiful. In human cultures, this might be inappropriate. In alien cultures, it could be anything from a mortal insult to a declaration of war. Queen Veltar's forearms went completely still, her massive black eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that made him want to disappear into the floor. The silence stretched on for what felt like centuries, but was probably only 10 seconds. Then she spoke, and her voice carried a strange new tone that Marcus couldn't identify. Beautiful, she repeated the word slowly, as if tasting it. This is a human concept, yes? You find our form pleasing to observe? Marcus wanted to explain that he'd meant to compliment the architecture, not her personally, but his mouth had apparently decided to continue its rebellion against his brain. Yes, Your Majesty, very much so. Another silence. Marcus was fairly certain he was about to become the first human to start an interstellar war through social awkwardness. He could already see the history books. The Great Zephyrian conflict began when linguist Marcus Chen insulted Queen Veltar by calling her beautiful. But then Queen Veltar did something unexpected. She stood up. When a Zephyrian queen stands up during a formal audience, it means something significant is about to happen. Marcus knew this from his cultural briefings. He just didn't know if that something would involve his immediate execution or merely lifelong imprisonment. The queen descended from her throne with fluid movements that made her seem to glide rather than walk. She approached Marcus, towering over him, and Marcus caught a scent like ozone and starlight. Up close, he could see that her crystalline crown wasn't just decorative, it pulsed with soft light, and he realized it was somehow connected to her nervous system. "Human Marcus Chen," Queen Veltar said, "you have given us something no being in this galaxy has ever offered." Marcus blinked in confusion. "I have?" "Honesty," she said simply. "For 700 cycles, beings from across the stars have come to this court. They speak of trade agreements and military alliances and cultural exchange. They tell us we are mighty, that we are wise, that we are to be respected and feared. But none have ever said we are beautiful." Marcus felt like he was missing something important. "Your Majesty, I didn't mean to—" She raised one of her 4 hands and Marcus fell silent. When a queen with the power to glass planets tells you to stop talking, you stop talking. "You humans," Queen Veltar continued, "are curious creatures. Your species makes bonds through attraction, through finding beauty in others, yes? This is how you choose mates, how you form deep connections." Marcus nodded slowly, not trusting his voice. "Among my people, beauty has no meaning. We reproduce through genetic compatibility determined by scent markers. We form alliances through displays of strength or intelligence. The concept of finding another being beautiful—" She paused, and the crystals on her crown pulsed brighter. "It is entirely foreign to us." The queen walked in a slow circle around Marcus, studying him like a fascinating specimen. "Tell us, human Marcus Chen, when you say we are beautiful, what do you mean? What do you see?" This was definitely not in the cultural briefing manual. Marcus swallowed hard and tried to find words that wouldn't make things worse. "I see someone who moves like flowing water but stands like a mountain. Your eyes hold the mystery of deep space, and your crown catches light like captured starfire. You're graceful and strong at the same time, and when you speak, it sounds like music made of crystal." The words tumbled out before he could stop them, and Marcus mentally prepared for death by alien execution. Instead, Queen Veltar made a sound that Marcus realized, with shock, was laughter. It sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Fascinating," she said. "You see poetry where we see only biological function? You find art in our evolutionary adaptations. She stopped directly in front of him again. Human Marcus Chen, you have given us a gift we did not know existed. And now, we must give you one in return. That sounded ominous. In Marcus's experience, alien gifts tended to be either incomprehensibly advanced technology or incomprehensibly painful death. Your Majesty is too kind, he managed to say. Queen Veltar's crown pulsed in a complex pattern, and suddenly every Zephyrian noble in the throne room dropped to one knee. Marcus looked around in confusion as the queen smiled, revealing teeth like pearls. "We have decided," she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber, "to accept the human concept of beauty. And we have decided that you, Marcus Chen of Earth, will teach us what this means." Marcus felt the floor seem to shift beneath his feet. "Teach you? You will remain here, in our court, as our advisor on human aesthetic philosophy. You will help us understand this beauty you speak of." The queen's expression grew more intense. "And perhaps, in time, you will help us become beautiful ourselves." The implications hit Marcus like a meteor strike. The queen wasn't just asking him to stay as a cultural consultant. She was asking him to fundamentally change how an entire species viewed themselves and their relationships. One compliment had somehow evolved into a complete social revolution. "Your Majesty," Marcus said weakly, "I'm not qualified for that kind of responsibility." Queen Veltar's laugh tinkled through the air again. "Human Marcus Chen, you have already begun. Your words have opened a door in our understanding that cannot be closed. The question now is not whether you are qualified, but whether you are willing." Marcus looked around the throne room, taking in the alien faces watching him with new interest, the impossible architecture, the queen whose beauty he'd somehow made real simply by recognizing it. He thought about his small apartment back on Earth, his boring job translating technical manuals, his complete lack of romantic prospects. Then he thought about the possibility of helping an entire civilization discover the concept of beauty, of being the bridge between species that might lead to true understanding rather than mere political alliance. "I'm willing, Your Majesty," he said, and meant it. Queen Veltar nodded once, a gesture that somehow conveyed satisfaction, anticipation, and approval all at once. "Excellent," she said. "Then let us begin your education in being beautiful, and ours in seeing it." As the Zephyrian court erupted in crystalline chatter and Marcus tried to process what had just happened to his life, he couldn't help but think that this was either going to be the greatest adventure in human history or the most spectacular cultural disaster ever recorded. Possibly both.